Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, April 30th, 2024. All right, I want to start today by reminding everybody that it is our fundraiser at antiwar.com. And the good news is that we have $40,000 in matching funds that some of our generous donors have put together. And to get that money, we need to raise that in matching funds. So that's where you guys can come in and help us out. Go to antiwar.com/donate to see the different ways you can support us. If you appreciate this show, this is how it's done. There wouldn't be a show if not for antiwar.com. So please help us out so we could get through this fundraiser quickly and focus on the work that we do. And as you all know, we certainly have our work cut out for us with all of the madness that's been going on recently. So antiwar.com/donate. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. to spend $320 million on Gaza Pier. So Reuters reported on Monday that the U.S. military's estimate of the cost to construct a pier on the coast of Gaza has risen to $320 million. So that's a huge cost for building a pier. The estimate is double what the military initially expected the project to cost. The construction has already begun and involves 1,000 U.S. troops operating just off the coast of Gaza, putting them at risk of being targeted, which, of course, if U.S. troops get hit, could lead to a major escalation in U.S. involvement in Gaza, in the slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza. A staging area for the pier has already come under mortar fire, as I covered last week. The attack did not hurt anybody and only minor damage was reported, but still, that highlights the danger of this project. According to Senator Roger Wicker, a Republican, he said that the $320 million price tag is what it will cost for the U.S. to operate the pier for just 90 days. And he's saying for every day the mission continues, the price tag goes up, and so does the level of risk. President Biden ordered the military to construct this pier for aid deliveries instead of pressuring Israel to open up more land border crossings, which is by far the most efficient way to get more aid into Gaza. Israel is still going to impose very strict inspections on this aid, though, so it'll initially be shipped from Cyprus. And Israel is requiring that they do inspections in Cyprus, and then again once it reaches the shore of Gaza. And important context, I think, is the fact that this was initially an idea thought up by Netanyahu. So, if this is something that he wants, you have to wonder if there is ulterior motive. And there was a Israeli journalist for Khan News that reported that during a meeting of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Security Committee, Netanyahu actually suggested using the pier to remove Palestinians from Gaza. Now, I haven't seen that reported anywhere else or really confirmed, but I think it's certainly a possibility that that's something that Netanyahu is thinking. All right, so the next story here, attorneys inside the Biden administration urge the U.S. to cut off Israel. So a group of at least 90 lawyers, including 20 who work in the Biden administration, are urging President Biden to cut off military aid to Israel because its slaughter in Gaza does not comply with U.S. and international law. So these are attorneys, and it's really interesting that there are actually lawyers within the Biden administration who are saying this, and they are making their case in a letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland, and this letter was obtained by Politico. They argue in the letter that Israel has violated the Arms Export Control Act, the Leahy laws, and the Geneva Convention, so U.S. law and international law. The letter reads, quote, "The law is clear and aligned with the majority of Americans who believe the U.S. should cease arms shipments to Israel until it stops its military operation in Gaza," end quote. So the letter's supporters include lawyers from the Department of State, Homeland Security, Justice, Labor, and Energy. So across U.S. government agencies, there are lawyers saying, we got to stop this. And this letter is still being circulated, so the number of signatories could increase. So a Justice Department staffer who signed the letter told Politico, quote, "This is a moment where the U.S. government is violating its own laws and policy. The administration may be seeing silence or only a handful of resignations, but they are really not aware of the magnitude of discontent and dissent among the rank and file," end quote. So that's a comment about the dissent within the administration when it comes to this policy of unconditional support for this horrific slaughter that is being committed in Gaza. And I know at least 3 State Department officials have resigned now. Education Department official, I believe, also resigned. And there has been lots of letters, dissent cables within the administration. For a little while, I was optimistic that maybe this pressure would do something, but unfortunately, it seems like Biden's sticking to what he's doing. He's just going to continue supporting this genocidal war, no matter what. It doesn't seem like losing the election is going to, his risk of losing the election because of it also isn't going to impact anything. But so there was this recent new national security memorandum that came out. And under that, Israel was required to provide assurances that the U.S. that it would not use U.S.-provided weapons to violate international law, or that it would. And they also said they wouldn't block aid shipments into Gaza, despite the massive civilian casualties and the blockade, and the fact that the U.S. is building a pier to get aid into Gaza. The State Department said Israel's assurances were enough. I mean, completely. Just so blatant the way that they are covering up Israel's crimes. And this is something that these lawyers get into in this letter. And the State Department has until May 8th to submit a report to Congress on those assurances. So I'm sure some Democrats, a small number, are going to make a big deal about it. But unfortunately, Congress is all in on this as well. All right. The next one here, Blinken says that the U.S. is nearing a Saudi-Israel proposal, but calm is needed in Gaza. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. And so Blinken is in the Middle East now, and he was in Saudi Arabia and said that the White House is finalizing an incentive package to bribe Israel and Saudi Arabia to normalize their ties. And they're seeking to expand what they call the Abraham Accords, which started under the Trump administration. But so this is apparently a World Economic Forum gathering in Saudi Arabia. Blinken said that the U.S. was ready to unveil its proposal. And so this is kind of a pipe dream at the moment, the idea of Saudi Arabia normalizing relations with Israel right now. I wouldn't put it past Saudi Arabia. They don't seem to really care about the Palestinians, but I think optically, this isn't something that they're going to do right now, and this is something that the U.S. is still pushing. And I think they have this whole plan. The idea is, okay, we'll get the Saudis and Israel to normalize, then Saudi Arabia will, pay for the reconstruction of Gaza, and then they'll put in some new Arab government there. But again, it's just a total pipe dream at this point. So this was something before October 7th leading up to it. The Saudis always said that a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, was always the condition for normalization with Israel. The Saudis seemed to abandon that requirement, and it seemed like there was some real progress toward a normalization deal. And what the Saudis are seeking from the U.S. is a mutual defense guarantee, meaning that the U.S. would commit to going to war for the Saudis. So very bad for us. And of course, there's going to be more weapon sales involved in that. And that still seems to be what Saudi Arabia is looking for. So it's not clear, but it seems like that's what the U.S. might be willing to offer. And the Saudis are saying now, again, they're back to the old demand that there must be a Palestinian state. And of course, it's not just Netanyahu who has totally rejected the idea of the Palestinian state. It's across the, many members of the Knesset, many Israeli ministers have also rejected it as well. Netanyahu has specifically said that he would not allow a Palestinian state in any future scenario. But still, I think this is something sort of a long-term plan that the U.S. is trying to come up with here. But again, it's just not something that is going to happen anytime soon. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. says 5 Israeli units are guilty of rights violations but will not cut military aid. So the State Department said on Monday that it determined 5 units of Israel's security forces were responsible for gross human rights violations against Palestinians in the West Bank, but the finding will not impact U.S. military aid to Israel. So this is similar to a story I went over yesterday. The U.S. was expected to sanction a Israeli military unit for crimes in the West Bank, including killing a 78-year-old Palestinian American in 2022, but they're not going to do it. And the State Department basically reaffirmed that on Monday. So it was apparently 5 Israeli military units, not just one, that they found were committing gross human rights violations. And under the Leahy laws, this investigation was being conducted. And the Leahy laws, which those attorneys said the U.S. said Israel was violating, the Leahy laws prohibit U.S. military aid to countries or military units that are committing gross human rights violations. So they found that these units were, and they're claiming that Israel has, basically taken care of 4 of the military units. I'll just read what the State Department spokesman said. This is Vedant Patel. He said, quote, 4 of these units have effectively remediated these violations, which is what we expect partners to do. For a remaining unit, we continue to be in consultations and engagements with the government of Israel, end quote. And again, the U.S. was expected to blacklist this one military unit. It's an ultra-Orthodox military battalion in the West Bank. But it didn't happen, and it didn't happen after Netanyahu and other Israeli officials made a big public stink about it. So apparently that worked. It just goes to show how the U.S. will bend over backwards to just keep the military aid flowing to Israel, even if they're violating all these laws. All right, the next story here, Israel plans to prevent men from fleeing Rafah. So this article is from the Middle East Eye, and it says that Israel is setting up a complex system of checkpoints that will prevent men of military age from fleeing Rafah in preparation for its offensive on the southern Gaza border city. And they're citing a senior Western official familiar with Israel's plans. So the checkpoints are designed to allow some women and children to leave Rafah ahead of an expected Israeli offensive, but unarmed civilian Palestinian men will likely be separated from their families and remain trapped in Rafah during an inspected Israeli assault. So this official is saying that men are not going to be able to leave. And they show the picture of a group of Palestinian men in Gaza who are rounded up, stripped naked, blindfolded. This is how they treat Palestinian men. Everyone's guilty to the Israeli forces. So that seems to be the plan here. And so we'll see. We've seen a lot of indications that the invasion of Rafah could happen soon. There's also the ceasefire negotiations. Hamas did not give its official response on Monday. Apparently, the negotiating team left Egypt, but they are still expected to come back with a reply soon. And Israel officials have said that they would suspend the invasion of Rafah if there is some kind of deal, but they keep saying that they're going to go through with it eventually. All right, so the next one here, new Israeli military outposts risk even bigger crisis in Gaza. This article is from Responsible Statecraft, and it says Israel is ramping up its development of a strategic route that bisects the Gaza Strip, according to new satellite imagery, which shows that Israeli forces have been modernizing 2 Israeli military outposts at the crossroads of key pathways Palestinians used to flee south in earlier stages of the war. The road, part of the so-called Netzarim corridor, runs east to west from the Gaza-Israel border to the Mediterranean Sea, just south of Gaza City. The Israeli Army's Engineering Corps has been developing it since shortly after Hamas's October 7th attack. So if you look at the map here, you see where this corridor is. And they basically are clearing and bulldozing a pretty wide area to create this road that Israel will always have access to so they can easily invade Gaza. And it cuts the northern part of Gaza from the rest of it. And this is part of the reason they're using this to prevent the displaced Palestinians from returning to the north. And one thing they're doing is they're building basically military bases here, 2 outposts that look like they're turning into modern, military bases. So this just goes to show Israel's long-term plans for occupation of Gaza, even though they deny that that's the plan. But they do say they want indefinite security control of Gaza. So what does that mean? That sounds a lot like military occupation. All right, so the next one here, where am I? In Gaza, authorities lose count of the dead. So this article is from the Wall Street Journal, and it's interesting. It's just basically saying how Gaza's Palestinian health authorities say that they can no longer count all the dead because communications have broken down. This is something we've kind of known for a while, but it reaffirms that and basically says that the U.S. and Israel think the numbers coming from Gaza's health ministry are accurate. Israel disputes the civilian casualties, but not by much. So Gaza's Palestinian health authorities say that they can no longer count all their dead. Hospitals, emergency services, and communications are barely functioning. Extracting bodies from the vast number of collapsed buildings is a gargantuan task and not a priority while the war continues. The nearly 7th-month war has taken a devastating toll on Gaza's residents. Health authorities say that more than 34,000 people have been killed so far, roughly 1.5% of the pre-war population. And the scale of the Palestinian numbers, treated with varying degrees of skepticism early on in the war, is now broadly accepted by United Nations experts, U.S. officials, and some Israeli military officials. But Palestinian authorities say figures in recent months have become less accurate given the difficulty in gathering data. They quote Medhat Abbas, a spokesman for the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. He said, quote, "At the beginning we had systems, we had hospitals. The civil defense teams were able to get people who were stuck under the rubble. Then the whole system collapsed," end quote. To estimate the number of fatalities, the ministry now relies heavily on other sources of information, such as testimonies from relatives of those killed, video of the aftermath of strikes, and reports by media organizations, Abbas said. The true picture of the war's human toll will take a long time to emerge, as thousands are estimated to be buried under the rubble and in unmarked graves, according to local health authorities, witnesses, and the United Nations. So, this is something earlier in the conflict. The health ministry took a very meticulous death toll. Basically, every person that was counted was reported dead by the hospitals or in a morgue. They would have their name and identification number. And I believe now it's based on media reports and cross-checked with testimony from family. So I believe they need to have multiple sources to count somebody, and it's something like 20-something thousand were counted initially in the original way that they were doing it, and it's about 10,000 that have been counted since then. And this just goes through and mentions people being buried that probably weren't counted, and there's forms that people have that they could fill out to report their dead family members, and they interview people who said that they didn't fill out that form. And this says basically the Israeli numbers match what Gaza's health ministry is saying. Israel claims that they killed 11,000 to 13,000 Hamas and other militants, while Hamas has put the number between 6,000 and 8,000. And Israel's also saying that they've killed 2 civilians for every militant. So that number 11,000 to 13,000, if it's 2 civilians to every militant, that puts it around, in the over 30,000. And so that's what they're saying, that that they've killed over 20,000 civilians. That's the admission that Israel is making when they say that. And then of course there's also, as I always mention when we talk about the death toll, the thousands of people who are missing and dead under the rubble, which the latest I saw, that number was around 7,000. So that puts the death toll over 40,000. So it's tough to really know what the real number is, but the important point here is that, I see this a lot online as Israel defenders saying, oh, the 34,000 number, that's not true, but there's all these signs and plenty of other reports. Also one from 972 magazine, their Hebrew sister magazine, I forget the name of it, saying that the Israeli military actually used the numbers from Gaza's health ministry to determine how many civilians they've killed. And there's also the reports of Israel killing hundreds of civilians to kill one Hamas guy. So it goes to show that they don't care about how many civilians they kill, and they do intentionally target civilian areas, civilian buildings, what they call power targets, basically to terrorize the people in Gaza. All right, so the next one here, I skipped one. Man, there's a lot on this page today. Israeli airstrikes on Rafah kill at least 22, including a 5-day-old baby. So this is an AP article. These were airstrikes Sunday night into Monday morning. They're still really bombing Rafah pretty heavily every day. And Palestinian health officials say that 22 people were killed in these strikes, including 6 women and 5 children. And one of the children killed in the strikes overnight into Monday was just 5 days old. And another update about Rafah, we had a story on yesterday's page in the lower section. If you remember, I went over, there was the Israeli airstrikes that killed, I believe it was about 22 people a few weekends ago, including 18 children, and one of the people that was killed was a pregnant woman, and they were able to save the baby, but unfortunately that baby died as well. So lots of children. The youngest, doesn't get much younger than 5 days old, being killed by these Israeli strikes on Rafah. And imagine if there was like a big invasion, ground forces with heavy airstrikes. I mean, it would just be a complete slaughter of civilians. All right, so the next one here, House representatives want college anti-Semitism monitors. So a bill was introduced in the House by Representatives Richie Torres, a Democrat from New York, and Mike Lawler, a Republican from New York, to create anti-Semitism monitors at colleges funded by the U.S. federal government. And this is a reaction to the pro-Palestinian demonstrations that have been falsely labeled as anti-Semitic. And the reason why I say they're falsely labeled like that is because many Jewish students are involved in these protests. You could see videos and pictures, Jewish Voice for Peace is one of the groups that's very involved. You see pictures that, banners, Jews for Palestine, Jews for peace, Jews for ceasefire. They were doing Passover Seders at these protests. I mean, this idea that they're anti-Semitic is completely laughable to anybody who's familiar with pro-Palestinian activism in the U.S. and at colleges. There's always Jewish people involved. So this bill would mandate the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, to impose a third-party anti-Semitism monitor on any college or university receiving federal funding. And that monitor would be appointed by the Secretary of Education. And the expense would be paid by the college. And failure to comply with the monitorship would result in the loss of federal funds. So these are members of Congress trying to crack down on the free speech, the freedom of expression of college students at federal-funded universities. And we've seen other members of Congress, including Speaker Mike Johnson, calling to send in the National Guard. And so speaking of which, we have a story down in the Frontline section about there was a protest. This article is from the Daily Beast, another Daily Beast article. So this was a protest at Northeastern University, and it got broken up by the Palestinians. It got broken up by the police after people someone said, "Kill the Jews." That was the excuse the police used to break it up. But it turns out that the person who said "kill the Jews" was a pro-Israel agitator. And you can actually see, there's a video of it, and you see someone say, "Kill the Jews." And the person, I forget exactly what they say, but they say that, and then they're like, "Oh, you guys, how about that, huh? Do you like that?" And, like trying to intentionally antagonize the pro-Palestinian side. And then that was the excuse to break up the protest. And of course, headlines all over the place, that someone said "kill the Jews" at this protest spread like wildfire, and people just, see that and they eat it up and they share it around. So this is the type of thing I think we're going to see a lot of this, pro-Israel people doing stuff like that. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. to buy Ukrainian-made weapons for Ukraine. So the U.S. will purchase $1.6 billion in Ukrainian-made weapons for Ukraine. This was reported by the Defense Post on Monday. So this $1.6 billion is included in a $6 billion tranche of weapons that the U.S. announced on April 26th, this past Friday, which I covered yesterday. These arms will be provided through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which allows the U.S. to purchase weapons for Ukraine. So one part of like the U.S. and NATO's long-term plan for Ukraine is they want to help them build up their military-industrial complex. And that is a term that Ukrainian officials actually use when they talk about this. And Western arms makers are also looking to manufacture weapons in Ukraine. So there's a quote from Arseny Pushkarenko. Probably butchering that, but he's the deputy chair of the Ukrainian Parliament's Committee on Foreign Policy and Interparliamentary Cooperation. He said Ukraine's military-industrial complex should entice other countries since the weapons it produces are battle-tested. He said, quote, "This is one of the factors in the development of the Ukrainian economy. Today, the military technologies that we have are tested in combat conditions, which makes our military-industrial complex attractive enough for many countries of the world," end quote. So we don't know exactly what types of weapons they're going to be buying from Ukraine. It looks like it's going to be drones, though, because the Pentagon listed in its $6 billion weapons package that it will include components to support Ukrainian production of unmanned aerial systems and other capabilities, end quote. So spending money to buy Ukrainian weapons for Ukraine. All right, so the next one here, NATO chief says that allies are not delivering arms to Ukraine fast enough. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg made an unannounced visit to Kiev on Monday and took aim at his own alliance for its pace of weapons deliveries to Ukraine. He said at a joint press conference with Zelensky, quote, "I know that serious delays in support have meant serious consequences on the battlefield. For months, the U.S. was unable to agree on a package, and European allies have been unable to deliver ammunition at the scale we promised," end quote. Stoltenberg said that Ukraine has been forced to ration ammunition, but he promised that the aid deliveries will speed up, and he pointed to the recent U.S. authorization of $61 billion in new spending on the proxy war. Of course, the U.S. is the biggest spender on this thing by far when it comes to the NATO countries. Number two is Germany, I believe. And the U.S. has already announced, $7 billion in new weapons, although the $6 billion is going to be purchased, and that could take time. Zelensky told reporters that arms shipments have arrived, but that his forces need more. And Stoltenberg was in Ukraine as Russian forces continue to make gains on the battlefield. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief just said that they had to withdraw from 3 villages in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, and Russian troops continue to advance, and weapon shortages is not the only problem in Ukraine. Of course, the manpower shortage is really the biggest problem that they have, and it's not clear if they're going to be able to find enough conscripts. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. and the Philippines are working on an intelligence sharing deal. So the U.S. and the Philippines are working on a new intelligence sharing deal as tensions are soaring between Manila and Beijing in the South China Sea. So U.S. and Philippine officials held talks on this last week. They're calling this deal the General Security of Military Information Agreement, and it will formalize intelligence sharing between the two militaries and create protocols for top secret information. So really trying to strengthen that U.S.-Philippine military alliance amid all these tensions in the South China Sea, which is really kind of the big flashpoint right now between the U.S. and China, because the U.S. has promised the Philippines that it will intervene if Philippine vessels come under attack, and there's always these encounters between Chinese and Philippine boats around these disputed rocks and reefs. So this news comes as the U.S. and the Philippines are conducting their annual Balikatan exercise, which are major military drills that the U.S. and the Philippines hold each year. And this year's iteration is being billed as the most expansive yet, and it includes exercises in Luzon, which is a northern Philippine province facing Taiwan, and also Palawan, which is a province on the South China Sea. So very sensitive areas for China. This is very provocative toward China, all this U.S. cooperation and increased support for the Philippines. All right, so that is it for today. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from Caitlin Johnstone, Mass Graves Unearthed in Gaza as the West Fixates on Antisemitism. One from Ron Paul, TikTok ban exposes hypocrisy in Congress. One from Maknoon Wani, Israel's spy tech industry is a global threat to democracy. One from Roger D. Harris, U.S. Congress makes down payment on World War III. One from Ivan Eland, Israel can still drag the U.S. into war with Iran. So please go check all of that out. Again, it's our fundraiser, antiwar.com/donate if you could help us out. Other ways you could help us is by spreading the word about antiwar.com and what we're doing over here, sharing this show, liking, subscribing, commenting. All that stuff really helps. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.